All right, here we go again. Another tough loss, and for the first time in the playoffs, Buffalo dropped back to back. Lindy Ruff's comments this morning seemed to hint at some serious decisions to be made before Game 4. When execution and compete are called to the questions by themselves, the door swings wide open, and it seems like no one is safe from the axe. It's a gamble that must come now or never if the Sabres want to preserve the series and tie things up on Tuesday night. Hello, welcome. I'm Ryan Lee, and welcome to Sabres Digest. All things Buffalo Sabres will be here on Sabres Digest, your latest news, updates, reactions, and more. So hit subscribe down below to follow along for the journey, and thank you so much for watching. Game 3 and Game 2 seemingly had a very similar script, and it seems very clear that this was a much different story than Game 2. A lot of what seemed to be the difference in that game was the Sabres undoing things by themselves. The self-inflicted errors, the mishaps, the turnovers, the lack of footing in key areas of the game causing chances the other way for Montreal. But in last night's game, it felt like it was really Montreal's game through and through. Yes, you have that opening minute goal by Tage Thompson, but once you get through that first maybe 10 minutes of the game, the other 50 after that was pretty much Montreal having their way with Buffalo. And if you look at the two deserve to win meters between Game 2 and Game 3 like I posted here, you have Game 2 where it seemed a lot tighter, it was a bit more of a coin flip, anything could have gone either way, versus Game 3 where it was very clearly one-sided Montreal's way. They were kind of just doing what they wanted to in the Sabres defensive zone throughout the entire game, and that is something that really allowed Montreal to take control and really put a stranglehold on Game 3 and in the second round series. And Lindy Ruff was talking about a lot of things during not only his availability last night, but also this morning as well. And when you really look at a lot of the comments and the different points of emphasis that he and the players made, it very seemingly seems like this is a player-specific problem, not a goalie problem. This is a player problem. And Lindy Ruff even emphasized that in his comments this morning, saying that Lyon had nothing to do with the loss. They would have liked to change a couple of the forwards and a couple of defensemen during the game, but they don't have that option. And that, to me, at the very least, signifies that there is going to be something in the mix within at least the top 18 skaters outside of the goal crease. A lot of people have been clamoring maybe for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to come in, which is a valid concern, but I agree with Lindy Ruff in saying that this was not really on Alex Lyon. He was just put in bad positions because of either another turnover in the offensive zone, maybe a bad pass that went straight to Montreal, or not covering the rush the other way, and even penalties. I'll get to that in a minute in just the penalties alone. When Lindy Ruff is talking about trying to shake some things up specifically in the forward core and the defense core, that should be a signal that most likely there could be some line flipping and even some new guys being rotated into the mix. We saw this in the last 3 losses with the 2 losses in Boston, even the first loss in Montreal. A change had come every single time so far with Carrick, Norris, and Ostlund. But what else could be a potential change in the works for the Sabres? These were the lines from last night's game. However, one of the big things I want to focus on is the bottom section in terms of who was scratched in yesterday's game and even some of the guys who had some skating time during Montreal. There was no practice this morning, but there was media availability. And in the skating session, there was some maybe rumors and hints based on who was in, who was out, that Michael Kesselring and Tanner Pearson could be potentially in the running because guys like Metsa and Halanus, Ellis, even Luukkonen, they were getting skating time in today just to kind of keep the body fresh, keep the body warm, and just to keep them engaged throughout the entire process. But specifically, singling out Kesselring and Pearson in today's open skate seemed to signify the potential of those two going in. And that was a point that was made actually by the beat reporters in the Sabres realm. And when you have a team like Montreal, you cannot play them the same way like you would play Boston. And I think that's been one of the big Achilles heels of Buffalo throughout this entire second round so far. They're trying to play it as if they're playing the same opponent twice when they really can't. Because Montreal presents a much different set of skills. They have much different strengths. And actually strengths that I've acknowledged before, they mirror the Sabres, but they're not playing that game. It seems like they're playing as if they are going up against Boston again or playing Tampa, where you're going to get a lot grimier, a lot more physical, but that just hasn't been the case at all in this series. If I'm not mistaken, the Sabres have out-hit the Habs throughout this entire series so far. But that just signifies that the Habs are not the one initiating. They're not focusing on the body to body. They're focusing on a much grander prize, the puck, and what they can do with it. And that is something that the Sabres have been getting away from. And this actually happened a lot in the Boston series where they were committing body to body, and it got them into trouble at times, especially in the penalty box, where Boston were able to get opportunities on the power play. And Montreal's power play have been just much more lethal in that right. And when you look at how the penalties really shaked out for the Buffalo Sabres, it's very clear that as this series is going along, you could call it frustration, you could call it losing your cool, you can put it however you want. But it's very clear that the Sabres have had penalty issues throughout this entire series. And you can argue maybe that's due to a lack of experience or what have you. But when you're taking nearly 27 penalty minutes in all of your losses with a power play that is over 20% in this playoff like Montreal's is, that is a recipe for disaster asking to happen. And when you have a power play that's as hot as Montreal's, who can really create on all ends of the ice, especially on a special teams unit that has been straight up lethal throughout this entire process, you're not going to get great results at the end of the day. And that was another sentiment that was echoed by Lindy Ruff on penalties and how they've just been taken at really bad times throughout the entire game. Specifically, how they took 5 penalties in the offensive zone, discipline not being good enough, with how dangerous Montreal can be 5-on-4. You give them enough time, they're going to get opportunities eventually. When you go up against a power play like Montreal's and you give them enough opportunities, it's not a matter of if, but when. The good news for Buffalo is that it seems like they might have gotten their own power play fixed up. Bad news, they're not getting the full complement of players that they want out there in the mix. If it was up to me, I'd make 2 big changes for Game 4. Logan Stanley, he has a big physical body, and he can get into some of those grimy areas in the corner, but this is not how that game is being played. This game is being played a lot more with the cycle around the zone, the puck movement, something that Logan Stanley kind of has an issue with. He's not as mobile as some of the other defensemen you have available, like Zach Metza or Michael Kesselring. They have that mobility aspect, the athleticism to keep up with how Montreal wants to play. They want to play fast. They want to play quick. They want to catch you off guard just based on quantity and opportunities alone. And the other one I could argue is Jordan Greenway and Tanner Pearson being a potential fix for a switch. Tanner Pearson hasn't really played a lot for Buffalo, but you also could argue he is an upgrade from what Jordan Greenway has provided. He got that one goal, and it was a key goal in that moment. But aside from that one goal, Jordan Greenway has been absent. He's not getting in the mix with guys like Matheson or Jack-Eye. You don't really have any of that from those two. They're big, but they're not doing anything with it. And when you have players specifically calling out things like the compete level and the competition and overall execution, and when you have a team like Montreal who is starting to ramp up their physicality and that nastiness throughout the playoffs, but you have just big bodies who don't really have that in them, that is a signal that things have to change and have to change quick. It's a now or never situation for Buffalo, because if you're down 3-1 going in at home, that is going to be a much more difficult ladder to climb. And we know this is the case because this was the exact same situation that the Sabres were in against Boston. They were the ones who took the 3-1 lead. They let Boston be the ones to lose their cool. And all of a sudden, Buffalo could be at risk of being in Boston's position, being down 3-1. And maybe having to force yourself to climb back in. If things don't get remedied before Tuesday night, this series could go way quicker than anyone expected. And that is the last thing that anyone in the Saberhood wants to see or feel. At the end of the day, the Sabres are playing with house money. And if anything in recent memory has served any sort of a reminder as a point of optimism, Anaheim went into Vegas and tied things up there. And Minnesota were able to get a game back on Colorado. Minnesota are good enough to do it. They made some changes. They called an audible in goal. Anaheim made a couple of changes. They flipped around their lines a little bit. I don't expect Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to come in, but if he does, I wouldn't be shocked. Every change that I'm expecting is within the front 18. Lindy Ruff's going to have a lot of options on his hands. He's going to have some long conversations with the staff. And if it serves anything like the other losses in the past, or even in the flip in December, it could simply just revolve a conversation around a dinner table that could get the ball rolling once again and restart the wheels on the wagon. That'll do it for all of us here in Sabres Digest. Thank you so much for watching. For all things Buffalo Sabres, your latest news, updates, reactions, and more, hit subscribe down below. And also feel free to comment. A lot of discussion being had throughout this entire playoff, and just getting a chance to not only get some of the smack talk, but also the conversation overall on how this entire series has unfolded has really just been really engaging and awesome to see from all points of view. And I want to say thank you so much for watching. You guys have been awesome the whole way through. Stay tuned for the next one. And as always, go Sabres.